Welcome, you curious minds, to a deep dive into an organization that, without a doubt, shapes our entire world, yet often sparks incredibly intense debate. Today, we're unpacking the United Nations.
hmm
We've got a comprehensive stack of sources here to really dig into its history, purpose, challenges, and, well, what its future might hold. Our mission, as always, is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge to help you understand why this global body even came into being, what it's actually achieved, and the truly complex issues it grapples with today.
And that's precisely the journey we're embarking on. We'll explore how the UN rose from the ashes of two devastating world wars, directly learning from the shortcomings of its predecessor, the League of Nations.
Right.
It's a story of translating those age-old ideals of peace, security, and human dignity into a functional global framework. What's fascinating here is seeing how this ambitious vision evolved and where it finds itself in our constantly shifting world.
So let's go back to the very beginning then. The catalyst for this monumental creation. The catastrophic repercussions of World War II were, obviously the primary driver behind the UN's birth.
Absolutely essential context.
What's often overlooked is that even as the war was drawing to a brutal close, plans for this new organization were already well underway. It wasn't a spontaneous, frantic reaction, but a deliberate, hopeful effort to ensure such global devastation never happened again.
And the architects of the UN had an invaluable, albeit cautionary guide, the brief, impactful history of the League of Nations.
Ah, yes, the League.
Formed after World War I, the League was largely perceived as, feeble and impotent. Its attempt to be a barrier against war was, as one source puts it, merely a dislocation of power rather than a true collective balance.
So not really unified.
Not really, no. Think of it less as a unified front and more as powerful nations maneuvering individually, which ultimately proved insufficient. It's a curious detail that the British Foreign Office even historically resisted using the name League of Nations or Covenant in their official records.
Huh, interesting.
The crucial insight from the League's failure wasn't just its weakness. It was the profound realization that unbridled, exclusionary sovereignty would lead to world chaos. This underscored the desperate need for acknowledgement of community, a recognition of mutual dependence, and preemptive action. The world couldn't afford another toothless tiger.
Makes sense. Speaking of names, the very phrase United Nations has a surprisingly dramatic origin story. Picture Rosie Goldstein, a secretary working for the highly secretive 20 Group, a covert intelligence unit operating in autumn 1941. She was sifting through thousands of messages when one secret letter arrived with special urgency. It was from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States, and its opening line was striking. We of the United Nations are in the middle of a great war against Hitlerism and all the forces of barbarism, oppression, and reaction to which he is common.
Wow, right in the middle of the war.
Exactly. Fast forward to January 1st, 1942. Churchill and Roosevelt decided that representatives of 25 nations would meet. And that phrase, United Nations, was doubled to officially encompass the Allied powers fighting the Axis.
So it started as the name for the Allies.
That's how the name we all know today, the one that embodies a global alliance, officially came to be.
This powerful collective vision quickly solidified into the UN Charter. Representatives from 50 nation-states formally signed it on March 27, 1945, though its foundational principles had been proclaimed earlier in late 1942.
Right, the Charter.
The Charter laid down core aspirations that are still regarded by many as the common faith of the world community. Peace and security, self-determination for peoples, the inherent dignity of the individual, social progress, and better standards of life for everyone.
Huge goals.
Absolutely. It's also significant that the signatory nations weren't just fully independent countries. They included protectorates and colonies, all holding out hope for their own independence.
That's a really important point about the colonies.
It is. From its founding in 1945 with 51 countries, the UN has expanded dramatically. Today, it boasts 193 members, with South Sudan as its newest, and its headquarters proudly stand in New York City.
As the UN moved into its early operational years, its charter clearly articulated its core purposes, which you can break down into three main areas. First, there's security, focused on preventing disputes between nations and ensuring existing conflicts are settled without resorting to war.
The peacekeeping aspect, essentially.
Exactly. Second, development and education, which aims to promote conditions for economic and social progress and champion human rights for all, regardless of race, sex, language, or religion.
the broader human progress goals.
And finally, social cooperation, which involves tackling a wide array of social, cultural, and humanitarian problems worldwide.
To put these ambitious purposes into action, the UN established several key organs. The General Assembly, or GA, is often called the supreme organ. It's basically the global town hall where all member states have a voice, meeting annually in New York.
All 186 nations currently, plus the observers.
Right, currently 186 nations, plus the 2 observer states, the Holy See and the Palestinian Authority. From a functional standpoint, however, the Security Council, or SC, is often seen as the main one. Its primary critical task is to maintain international peace and security, and it currently comprises 15 members.
With the famous veto power for the Permanent Five.
Precisely, which we'll certainly get into.
Imagine the scene for that very first General Assembly meeting. It was 10:30 a.m. on Monday, January 10th, 1946. More than 80 countries had representatives there, filled with, a palpable sense of both solemnity and hope.
A pivotal moment.
The mayor of London extended a warm welcome, speaking of future peace. The Chief Justice of India introduced the assembly, drawing on the wisdom of Christian, Hindu, and Muslim faiths to emphasize the significance of the moment. A former chief of the Norwegian parliament presented a symbolic gavel crafted from the wood of a ship from the American War of Independence.
A powerful symbol.
A powerful nod to the fight for liberty. And the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs urged everyone to lighten the burdens of armaments and tackle pressing social and economic needs. It truly felt like a genuine moment of global unity, a turning point.
And right there, at that meeting, a Ukrainian delegate even made a significant request for a statute prohibiting gigantic powers from having predominating votes.
Interesting. How did that go over?
Well, the task of considering that proposal and further work was temporarily assigned to the United States, China, France, Great Britain, and the USSR, the eventual Permanent Five. Ultimately, the resolutions passed reflected amity, cordiality, and cooperative understanding, truly setting a hopeful, collaborative tone for the new organization.
Now, let's fast forward a bit and navigate a far more tumultuous period. The post-World War II realities that immediately tested this new institution. The UN's creation was directly born out of the untold hardships of 2 world wars.
Unimaginable suffering.
The international community had finally grasped a bitter truth. Diplomatic and friendly negotiation of issues among states without a military negation was impossible. The agony of the Holocaust, the terrifying threat of atomic bombs, and the widespread killing of innocent civilians had pushed nations to deeply abhor war.
A collective never-again sentiment.
Exactly. The core goal, then, was explicit: safeguarding future generations through the collective efforts of the Security Council, which controversially granted veto power to the 5 most powerful states.
And that power structure immediately faced challenges. The UN faced an immediate brutal test with the Korean War, which erupted on June 25, 1950, when North Korean forces invaded South Korea.
A major early conflict.
This quickly became a proxy conflict, with communist countries supporting North Korea and the UN primarily backed by the US supporting the South. The UN Security Council swiftly condemned the invasion, and the US dispatched ground forces under the UN's auspices.
So the UN acted quickly.
It did. The UN launched a counteroffensive, nearly pushing the communist forces to collapse by late 1950. But then, Chinese intervention in October and November dramatically shifted the balance, pushing the front back to the 38th parallel, where it eventually stabilized, leading to a truce in July 1953.
Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit sobering. Despite 500,000 deaths and 200 ruined villages, our sources state that there was nothing to change in comparison with the last decade of Korean society. What does this profound statement tell us about the UN's immediate impact on such a devastating conflict?
It's a stark assessment, isn't it? It highlights the immense cost of intervention and perhaps the limitations of external forces in fundamentally altering deep-seated societal structures, even when acting under a UN mandate to repel aggression. The human cost was enormous, yet the pre-war status quo, geographically speaking, was largely restored.
It really underscores the complexity of achieving lasting change through intervention.
Absolutely. And paradoxically, even though the UN was created for peace and social progress, our sources highlight that its colonial roots deformed it from the beginning.
How so?
Well, think about it. Half of the current UN member states were born from colonial domination, gaining self-determination often against the desires of the great powers, some of whom were founding UN members.
Right, the
That's
irony.
a huge irony. In a poignant sense, one document states, the United Nations is a child of 23 African nations, profoundly emphasizing this foundational tension and how the global struggle for independence shaped its early growth and indeed its very identity.
The Cold War era also casts a long shadow, significantly impacting the UN's capabilities, didn't it?
Oh, massively. The intense tensions during this period limited the usefulness of the UN as a peacekeeping instrument. For instance, a classic debate from the time questions whether UN custody of a heliport during the Berlin airlift would have truly guaranteed impartial administration, or if either superpower would have actually cooperated.
So the superpower rivalry essentially paralyzed it sometimes.
Often, yes. This era meant that the constant disagreement among the permanent members frequently forced the Security Council to become the principal, but often constrained, organ for peacekeeping.
Despite these significant Cold War limitations, UN peacekeeping emerged as one of its three core pillars, standing alongside human rights and humanitarian assistance.
It did. And there was a genuine triumphant moment in its history. The massive reaction of the UN Security Council to the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait on 2 August 1990.
The first Gulf War.
Right. This included sanctioning oil exports and authorizing the use of force, showcasing the UN's ability to act decisively when the permanent members aligned. By mid-1992, the UN was engaged in incredibly diverse operations,
Like where?
from overseeing elections in Namibia to supporting South Africa's transition, disarming forces in El Salvador, and monitoring Soviet troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. The iconic blue helmets even helped secure a ceasefire in Yugoslavia.
But Yugoslavia.
But yes, this specific success was quickly overshadowed by the magnified recognition of UN's failure at preventing the disintegration of former Yugoslavia. This mixed legacy truly shows the complex, often contradictory reality of its interventions. Success in one area, perceived failure in another, almost simultaneously.
So, beyond the critical work of peacekeeping, the UN Charter envisioned a far broader mandate for human progress and socio-economic development.
Exactly. That's crucial. This expansive vision led directly to the establishment of numerous human rights committees and enshrined the cardinal principles of social justice and equality of man. It's about building a better quality of life, not just preventing war.
And this brings us to the specialized agencies, right? The ones doing the work on the ground.
Absolutely. They truly showcase the UN's practical on-the-ground impact. Take the World Health Organization, or WHO, established on April 7, 1948, as the UN's specialized health agency.
A household name now, especially recently.
Indeed. Its historical roots actually stretch way back to the 1830s, prompted by the first major epidemic scares. The WHO's evolution is fascinating. It moved from what was initially a Western academic and narrow scientific view of health to a higher and broader universal plane, recognizing health as a global right and concern.
Then there's the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, created on December 11, 1946, initially as an international fund for the children of Europe.
The post-war devastation for children was immense.
Heartbreakingly urgent. Millions of starving, dying, refugee, and working children scattered across Europe, China, and India. Early funding was absolutely vital, with free world states contributing $1.60 per child under 14. This led to $8.1 million in its first year, reaching 1.7 million children.
A significant early effort. Though it faced challenges, like the initial exclusion of the socialist bloc and later funding dips, its immediate impact was undeniable.
Another vital agency, expanding the UN's reach into minds and cultures, is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, created on November 16, 1945.
Right, UNESCO, covering a broad mandate.
It's structured with functional divisions spanning education, natural sciences, social science, and culture, with later additions for human rights, peace, and information. UNESCO operates as a key part of the UN family of cooperating international organizations, engaged across a broad spectrum, from preserving heritage sites to promoting literacy.
And crucially, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, which faced immense and immediate challenges during the Bosnian War in May 1992 due to the massive flow of refugees.
Bosnia was a major humanitarian crisis.
A huge one. Our sources indicate the UNHCR was initially underfunded and unable to allocate more resources, leading to controversial decisions where they were accused of condemning them refugees to continuing persecution and violence. by refusing relocation.
That sounds like a terrible dilemma.
It does. However, Operation Provide Promise, one of the longest humanitarian airlifts in history, ran from 1992 to 1996, delivering an astonishing 159,622 tons of food, medicine, and equipment.
That's incredible volume.
It is. This operation showcased multi-agency coordination, including UNHCR, WFP, WHO, NATO, and U.S. Armed Forces, even amidst severe obstacles from Serbian irregulars.
So despite the criticisms,
Exactly. What's truly fascinating here is the complex reality this highlights. Despite facing severe obstacles, including accusations of being disarmed, Operation Provide Promise demonstrates that in that specific context, the UNHCR was remarkably effective in delivering aid, to the point of being called the only successful UN agency during the Bosnian War. This shows the profound, yet often challenging impact of UN agencies on the ground in dire circumstances.
zooming out to broader humanitarian achievements, it's clear that humanitarian aid initiatives have gained significant momentum since the late 1980s, growing into what our sources call a $10 billion industry.
A huge sector now. This involves numerous NGOs, many of whom claim impartiality, though the sources also mentioned lobbying wars among them, reflecting the complex landscape of global aid. It's not just the UN, it's a whole ecosystem.
And on the legal front, the treaties and agreements.
Right. It's important to recognize that the League of Nations, despite its failures, sowed and continue the seeds for modern international treaties. We see precursors like the Hague Conventions of 1899 and of 1907, which already laid down rules for diminishing the evils of war.
Building on what came before.
Precisely. The UN, building on this foundation, emerged with the clear intention to work for a largely peaceful and tranquil world through the enactment of international treaties and conventions, establishing a framework for global cooperation under law.
Now, let's bring our deep dive into the 21st century. The post-Cold War era began with a wave of optimism in 1991, widely heralded as the triumph of global multilateralism and the dawn of a new era.
A lot of hope back then.
Yet this hope soon clashed with a harsh reality marked by an explosive growth of conflicts, wars, violence, and terror, and a growing gulf between haves and have-nots. This period also saw 50 years of unipolarity dominated by the U.S., meaning a single global superpower, and America's withdrawal from various international treaties.
A very different global picture emerged than what was hoped for in '91.
So what does all of this mean for the UN as it celebrates its 75th anniversary, facing what our sources describe as unprecedented turmoil that questions the role and efficacy of the UNO?
It means the UN finds itself at a critical juncture, continuously facing persistent critiques and challenges. Common criticisms are sharp. People call it not useful, say it doesn't act when it is supposed to, nor stops when it needs to, and accuse it of being hypocritical, biased, an elite organization caring primarily about own preservation, and even impotent.
Strong words.
Very strong. There's also a lack of clarity on the UN's exact authority and often conflicting roles for peacekeepers. Examples of perceived failure are cited in relation to addressing issues in Sri Lanka from the 1970s to the 1990s and Sudan's Iraq-like background of protracted conflict.
And a particularly prominent area of critique is aimed squarely at the UN's funding and how its resources are allocated, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Funding is a prominent critique. Allegations are rife that resources are distributed uneven and without transparency. For instance, our sources highlight a stark disparity. One high GDP country received $1 million in 2021, while another, with an even higher GDP, received $77 million, nearly 80 times more, with no detailed public explanations.
80 times more with no explanation.
According to the source material, yes. This has fueled allegations of political reward, which is incredibly detrimental to the UN's perceived neutrality and has intensified lobbying efforts against specific states.
That really undermines trust.
It certainly can. Beyond that, certain major states have been accused of leveraging their influence over UN funds to exploit and harm less powerful states, sometimes even demanding the closure of a case in exchange for financial assistance. This kind of pressure, if true, severely imperils impartiality.
And the divide and rule accusation.
There are also accusations that major funders use a divide and rule approach to buy out agencies, essentially directing them towards national interests. However, despite these severe criticisms, it's also important to acknowledge that the UN's collective efforts have managed to prevent world wars, citing examples such as potential conflicts between North Korea and Asia or India and Pakistan, and have supervised military interventions to prevent WMD use. It's a complex picture.
That's a crucial point. One thing that truly comes through in the sources is that adaptation has been an essential part of UN success. The organization has consistently shown its ability to adapt to global changes since its foundation.
That adaptability is key.
For instance, the establishment of the UN Environmental Program in 1973, following the Stockholm Conference, was a rapid response to emerging ecological concerns. It has also demonstrated rapid responses to non-traditional security threats, with agencies like UNDP, UNICEF, and FAO expanding their mandates.
And the UN plays an absolutely vital, often understated role in enhancing global cooperation beyond direct conflict. It helps resolve conflicts over contentious issues like trade, tariffs, and immigration.
The less headline-grabbing stuff.
Often, yes. Its intervention strategies range from dialogue and diplomacy to active peacekeeping and disarming, all aimed at preventing violence from escalating and even countering propaganda. Peace conferences and the establishment of truce lines are also vital tools in these ongoing efforts.
Okay, so let's unpack this core principle. The UN promotes the equality of man and enshrines social justice in its charter, asserting that all member states are equal, regardless of their population size or military might. How vital is this principle in today's complex, power-imbalanced world? To me, it seems foundational.
It is theoretically foundational. It provides a unique global platform where, in principle, every nation has an equal voice. It aims to level the playing field in international relations, offering smaller or less powerful states a forum they wouldn't otherwise have against dominant powers. Whether it always succeeds in practice is, of course, part of the ongoing debate and critique we've discussed.
Right, the ideal versus the reality again.
Precisely. And underpinning all of this, the UN continues to strengthen the international law system, which establishes foundational rules and standards for states' conduct. Since its founding, international law has expanded dramatically, now addressing economic, social, cultural, humanitarian, and environmental problems. The establishment of the International Court of Justice Statute and the International Law Commission are key examples of this legal architecture.
So it's still building that legal framework.
It is. But what's truly fascinating here, and a point of ongoing debate, is the shift from intensive and boundless enthusiasm for international law right after WWII to a general prevailing suspicion and skepticism after the 1960s.
A shift in attitude.
A definite shift. This has led to fundamental questions that we still grapple with today. What is the nature of international law? Is international law truly law? How does it actually function in practice? And what is or should be the role of the United Nations in all of this? These aren't easy questions.
We've journeyed through the United Nations origins, its triumphs, its missteps, and its ongoing struggle to adapt to an ever-changing world. From a post-World War II vision of enduring peace to the complex global challenges of the 21st century, the UN story is one of ambitious ideals constantly meeting harsh realities.
Indeed. While the UN has made tremendous strides in its ability to bring disparate groups and nations together, our source also provocatively states that its measured success sometimes makes its situation appear more brutal, more tragic to the people of the world.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. Measured success making things seem worse.
It suggests that the glimpses of what's possible, the successes it does achieve, perhaps throw the failures and ongoing suffering into sharper, more tragic relief. It raises expectations that aren't always met.
So, what does this all mean for you, the global citizen? Consider this. If the dream of life in peace, freedom, and happiness of a firm union of all nations is far from realized, and yet the stark alternative, as history shows, is the immense cost of unchecked global conflicts, well, how should we as individuals and as a global community redefine our expectations and our engagement with vital institutions like the United Nations to truly build a better, more stable future?